This Sunday, Christina Nolan has competition in her bid for Vermont's Republican U.S. Senate nomination. And the recent VPR Vermont PBS debate showed a clear divide between the views of Vermont's former federal prosecutor and two conservative rivals, especially on issues like what to do about gun violence.
You know, it's a slippery slope once we start with more gun control regulations, but I don't think we need to take guns away from innocent people.
I am not in favor of gun control.
Now is a time for bipartisanship. It is not a time for yelling at each other at podiums.
As you'll hear, Vermont Republican voters have a clear choice ahead on our Sunday program. Good morning, everyone. I'm Stuart Ledbetter, and this is NBC5 In Depth. This week, we continue our political conversations ahead of the upcoming summer primary. This morning, the two Republicans hoping for an upset in the primary for U.S. Senate. With Senator Pat Leahy retiring this year, the seat is wide open for the first time in almost half a century. In February, we featured an in-depth conversation with former U.S. Attorney Christina Nolan. She had just launched her campaign. She was the first high-profile Republican in the race to challenge Democratic Congressman Peter Welch for the Senate. Nolan would be the first woman, the first openly gay, and she released a campaign video emphasizing her roots in Vermont. She won immediate support from Governor Phil Scott, who praised her temperament and civility.
Well, I absolutely think I can win because Vermonters want a problem solver in Washington, someone who will go down there and have common sense and reach across the aisle, somebody who understands the state of Vermont like I do. I was born and raised here. My family goes back generations here. So I know the issues that are weighing on their hearts and minds.
A key question, though, how much compromise and moderation Vermont Republicans really want in their next senator. This morning, two conservatives vying for the nomination. Gerald Malloy, welcome to NBC5 In Depth.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Great to be here. Appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you being here. You're now a Republican U.S. Senate candidate from Vermont, and I'm wondering, because many are probably seeing you for the first time, you're a resident of Perkinsville. You had a long career in the military. Why'd you enter this race? You are a first-time candidate, sort of starting at the top.
Well, thank you, Stuart. Really, to kind of sum it up, I couldn't stand by and watch the direction our country's going in. And it dates back to day one of the Biden administration, and what I think is that government getting away from abiding by the Constitution, getting away from promoting economic prosperity, and getting away from ensuring defense, security, and order for our country. Series of events, unconstitutional acts and mandates and initiatives. Afghanistan, which was a debacle, and of course here we are with the 40-year high inflation and many other issues, foreign policy blunders. So when Senator Leahy made his announcement, that's when the thought first really came into my mind, and I did a lot of boots on the ground campaigning. I saw that Vermonters want to change, and I decided to enter into the race.
Well, it's been a long time since a real conservative won a general election statewide in Vermont. What's going to make you different?
Well, as I mentioned, when Senator Leahy made his announcement, I actually did quite a bit of research, and it's very interesting to me the similarities between when he became the first and only Democrat senator from Vermont back in 1974. Just got out of Vietnam, just had the oil embargo, had a president embroiled in Watergate, and had just resigned. Weeks later, Senator Leahy won by a narrow margin. Here we are, 48 years later, and we've got a lot of kind of similar problems, I think. So again, when I started my campaigning in earnest on the ground, I visited 25 towns and cities across Vermont. I've met literally thousands and thousands of Vermonters, and no ifs, ands, or buts. They want change, including the Democrats candidate that I think I'll likely be facing. Not happy with the performance of our government and where the direction the country's been led in the last 15, 16, 17 months.
You favor overturning Roe v. Wade. We're awaiting the Supreme Court decision on that. As a senator, would you then vote to outlaw abortion in all 50 states without exception, including risk to the life of the mother?
Well, I've actually posted my thoughts on that. So I am pro-life, as the Republican Party talks about the sanctity of life from conception to natural death. That's my personal belief, my religious belief. I've also voiced very publicly, I served 22 years in the military under the exact same oath a senator takes to support and defend the Constitution. And my interpretation of that is per the 10th Amendment, Roe v. Wade should never have been decided by the Supreme Court. That decision, that power, not reserved elsewhere in the Constitution, belongs at the states, respectively, and the people. To me, that's democracy. And so what I would do at that point, and I do think is what's going to happen, I would exercise my vote as a Vermonter. For instance, I will vote against Prop 5 and Article 22, and I will weigh any state candidates, their views as I vote for them in state elections.
Right. But as a senator, would you vote to outlaw abortion in all cases for the country?
I would, but I don't know if that's going to happen.
Well, no, I don't either, but it could. And so I want to be clear on it. What should Congress do, if anything, to address the country's gun violence problem?
Well, I've prayed for the people of Uvalde and Buffalo and other incidents, prayed for the victims and the communities and their families. I see that. I believe the root cause there, Stuart, is a mental health issue and also social isolation and breakdown of the family. One thing that I would look to do, given this some thought, recently we saw another $40 billion go over to Ukraine. I'll get back on topic here in a sec, but we saw $40 billion go over in an omnibus bill that you couldn't debate and you couldn't change. I would have not approved of that. I would have looked to take maybe some of that $20 billion and invested it in mental health resources. And over many years, if you look at per capita, per 100,000 people, we used to have about 300 beds. Now we're in the teens now. I would try to improve our mental health administration and resources across the country. For instance, 20 billion goes a long way, and then improve processes so we can identify and act on the warning signs. The warning signs are out there, and develop processes and capability to treat mental illness and mental health issues before they get to that horrible event.
Well, should an 18-year-old be able to buy an assault-style weapon in our country?
Yes. Okay. I am not in favor of any changes to the Second Amendment.
Let me ask you about money. The U.S. debt now tops $30 trillion. That is going to require what specific change of the next Congress and president?
Well, it's all about overspending. And we need to have a budget and have some fiscal responsibility. And for instance, my Democrat possible candidate, 15 years on his watch, that national debt's gone up over 300%. That's not acceptable. And I've been working in industry and business for the last 11 years. That kind of performance gets you fired. It's about fiscal responsibility, not overspending, and really even more so, to me, it's about kind of a difference of outlook. I think the Republican Party stands for promoting economic opportunity, and what I see in the last 15, 16 months from the Democrat Party is not promoting economic opportunity, just providing a stimulus for people. Those stimulus, it's trillions and trillions of dollars that are causing the inflation.
Anything more the U.S. should do to try to restrain Russia in the wake of its attack on Ukraine?
I'm confused by what the U.S. is doing right now, and I even posted on Vermont Daily Chronicle. I'm, as you mentioned, a retired Army officer. I served as a commander in an MLRS and ATACMS unit, served with that capability in combat, fired 650 MLRS rockets. I said maybe over 2 months ago that we should provide, if we're serious about supporting Ukraine, and we ought to be, that we should provide MLRS capabilities. We still have not done that, and Ukraine's been asking for it for a long time, actually.
Yeah. talk about the southern border. It appears a mess. What's the answer?
The answer is the wall. Day one, one of the, as I talked about my concern growing over time with the Biden administration, Democrat-controlled House and Senate, day one of his, what I would say, unconstitutional executive orders was to stop work on the wall. I think we put up the wall, and that will have a lot of different impacts, including economic impacts, crime impacts, and mostly the opioid crisis. We have immigration laws. It's about time we actually started enforcing them. In terms of the opioid crisis, I've done a lot of research in there. We confiscated 10,000 pounds of fentanyl last year in the United States, most of it coming from China. I actually call that chemical warfare. That's enough to kill 2 billion people. So put up the wall. That would be one of the starting points to reduce dramatically the opioid crisis that killed 100,000 people, 100,000 Americans last year.
In the time we have left, Mr. Malloy, you've said you're a strong Trump supporter. Wish you'd taken part in the January 6th rally at the Capitol. How should Vermont Republicans distinguish you from, particularly from the former federal prosecutor Christina Nolan?
Experience, leadership, and performance, 42 years serving our country in government, military, and business. And in business, the last 11 years, mostly in the Washington, D.C. area, working directly with U.S. government organizations and providing services to them. Sum those all up, it's about leadership. And I've had leadership positions for the last 42 years, and I will bring leadership to the Congress and to the Senate for Vermonters and for Vermont to get our country back on track.
Retired Army Major Gerald Malloy of Perkinsville, it's been our pleasure. Thank you for being with us on NBC5 In Depth.
Thank you, Stuart. May the 14th star shine bright. May God bless America.
Ahead, we'll hear from the other conservative hoping for a breakthrough in Vermont's August 9th Senate primary. He is Myers Mermell, and he'll join us in a moment. In their first broadcast debate last week on VPR and Vermont PBS, viewers saw a clear divide between former U.S. Attorney Christina Nolan and two Republican rivals who recently entered the race, particularly on the issue of conservative orthodoxy, support for former President Donald Trump, and the need for any kind of gun reform in Congress. We've heard from Gerald Malloy this morning. Now, a few minutes with Myers Mermell. He's new to Vermont politics, but ran for lieutenant governor a decade ago in New York State. His Vermont Senate bid endorsed this week by former Arkansas governor and presidential candidate Mike Huckabee. Myers Mermell, welcome to NBC5.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. Many people are probably seeing you for the first time as you run for the Republican nomination to represent Vermont in the U.S. Senate. Tell us about yourself. What have you been doing the last 20 years?
Well, as you know, we met first at UVM, which was a very formative experience for me. Under Keith Meisner's leadership program, I served on 17 student committees, headed those, was a White House intern, served on the U.S. Senate Committee for Veteran Affairs. And like many people at the end of UVM, I couldn't find a job in Vermont. But I did get a job out of career services at the Bank of New York. So my choice was either take a job at Bank of New York, which was fairly well paying, or refinish floors with a friend's father. So I decided to move to New York, and I've been very active in New York. Over a period of time, I became re-involved in politics. I worked on Mike Huckabee's presidential campaign, John McCain's campaign. I ran for lieutenant governor of the state of New York in 2010. I had support out of 45 out of 62 counties, which was the most support of anyone. And actually, those counties are not unlike our 14 counties. I feel like I have some deep roots in Vermont. My fourth great-grandfather fought alongside the Green Mountain Boys in the Revolution. My second great-grandmother was an indentured servant to Governor Williams in the early 19th century for 20 years. But I bought a house in Manchester in 2015, and I have been paying taxes in Manchester, as we all do, since then.
And you've been a full-time resident a couple of years?
Yes, sir.
You said the other day in a debate you want to liberate Vermont. From whom?
I want to liberate Vermont from failed social policies. You know, at a big picture, right, the ancient Israelites were wandering the desert for 40 years. We've been under the thumb of Pharaoh here for 48 years, and these policies have kept us down. Right, the average income in Vermont is $59,000. That's $17,000 less than the regional average. And the policies that have been enacted in government have really depressed our ability to lead fuller lives. I think we see that today, especially with taxation, inflation, and food prices, right? And gas prices.
Let me ask you.
And heating fuel prices.
Absolutely. It's on everyone's mind.
$5 gas today.
What can Congress and the president do to bring inflation and fuel prices down?
I have 6 points that I think I wish they would consider. The first is to cut wasteful spending. The second is to cut taxes to spur investment. The next is to deregulate businesses and eliminate the price controls that they're putting on.
Well, how does that change
let me finish.
The global price of oil?
I'm getting there, right? The next is to liberate drilling, right, and allow environmentally sensitive drilling. The other piece of that is monetary policy, right? We have to look at the Fed. We have to allow the Fed to increase rates. We also have to allow the Fed to sell assets off its inflated and bloated balance sheet. And the last point that I would make is that I think, it's very hard for us to hear this, but last week Janet Yellen admitted that inflation took a path that she hadn't expected. She admitted that she had failed to curb inflation, and she's Biden's representative. So unfortunately, it is the administration's issue. I think it can be corrected. I would call for her resignation immediately. When I was a banker at Morgan Stanley, I worked very closely with Jamie Dimon, who's now the CEO of JP Morgan. He was my client. I worked with him shoulder to shoulder for 2 years. He's really a genius. He's a Democrat. He'd be a real credit to this country. I think he could help turn things around.
Let me ask you about another high-profile issue, gun violence. You're
Yes.
a conservative Republican. What, as a new senator, would you favor Congress do to try to address gun violence?
It's a difficult issue. The Second Amendment is very important to me. I'm a hunter, and I also believe in the constitutional value of the Second Amendment. I think we need to try to remove guns from the hands of criminals. I think we need to harden the schools. And I think we also need to finally provide mental health support, and that hasn't been done. This idea of outlawing guns, right, is a very quick and easy answer, and it may work for Matthew McConaughey, but it's more difficult than just eliminating guns. In New York and Chicago and Los Angeles, guns are outlawed, and violence is there every day. When I was at Yale as a divinity school student, I spent a summer intermediating incidents of violence where guns were prohibited between where clergy members would come in between community members and the police in incidents of gun violence. And that happened 2 or 3 times a week. And that's where guns were outlawed. So I don't think that's our solution alone. I think we have to really delve deeper in this problem.
Well, when you say alone, is it okay with you for an 18-year-old on their birthday to walk in and buy an AR-style assault weapon and 1,000 rounds of ammunition?
An AR
style assault weapon.
Assault weapon. I think we need to look at the ages that we're asking people to undertake responsibilities. I mean, I heard somebody say, well, if we think that 5-year-olds can talk about their gender, why can't 18-year-olds hold guns?
Okay. Supreme Court's going to rule anytime on abortion rights. Mm-hmm. As a freshman U.S. Senator, would you vote to outlaw abortion in all 50 states without exception, including the life of the mother?
No, I would not. I am pro-life, right? But I believe in exercising the will of the people. From this leaked memo, it looks as if, or this early ruling, it looks as if they're pursuing this system of federalism, right, where it's going down to the states, right? Texas will be pro-life, right? And Vermont will be pro-choice. Vermont is the most pro-choice, according to Pew, of all states, with the exception of Massachusetts. And we will have a plebiscite here, Prop 5, right? As a Christian, right, I am pro-life, but I fully expect that 400,000 people will vote for Prop 5. So I think it should be left to the states.
But there could be a move in Congress to codify, a prohibition on abortion.
Like the Right to Life organization did in 1970, the last time that the Senate was contested.
You'd vote no then against a blanket ban.
I don't think that's right.
What's the plan for the southern border? It appears a mess right now. Mm-hmm. How do you fix it?
I think you enforce the existing laws, right? And unfortunately, that's not being done. And I think it's a real problem, especially for drugs. We've had a drug problem that's only getting worse in Vermont. And remarkably, there is, and I've talked to senior law enforcement officials this week, there is no reliable reporting on crime incidents. There are incidents, but there are no summary reports. We used to have something called the Crime Report in Vermont that ended in 2016. The Department of Justice now takes the information from Vermont, these incident reports, but since 2020, they have not given us summaries back. So if we want to look at what Giuliani did with CompStat, and I helped in Times Square before that, but if we want to execute something like what Giuliani did with CompStat, we need to have information, and the Department of Justice is not giving us that information back, and it hurts our police officers because they can't appeal to the public for more resources because they can't present any information about the scope of all the crime that's happening.
So how should Republican primary voters who will start to vote at the end of this month,
right,
ahead of the August 9th primary, how do they distinguish between Myers-Murmel and Gerald Malloy and Christina Nolan?
Well, I think it's important to realize that I am the only business person in this race. And to me, the most important issues are inflation, taxes, and the price of food, heating fuel, and gasoline. And I will act on those things. And I have an economic plan, right? I'm running against a Department of Justice employee, a former soldier, and a lifelong politician with a very generous pension. And with the exception of the veteran, there isn't one of them that's had a real job. And I've had a number of real jobs, and I've been in the real economy. So I understand the pressures that people are under, and I don't think these other people do.
You have a website, and we'll put the address on the screen, but let me ask you about something that I thought was sort of unusual. Vermont should stop stringing fiber optic cable along roadsides to deliver rural broadband and then negotiate with Starlink instead. You want UVM to pay a penalty for failing to educate more Vermont kids. Are these U.S. Senate issues something that would come before the Senate?
It's part of my effort to build the Vermont economy, and I think there have been mistakes made at the federal level. Unfortunately, Senator Leahy left $488 million on the table in earmarks that we could have used. They have not pursued a $2 to $8 billion microchip fabrication plant that we should have had. We're not a wealthy state. We should pursue the federal government for these issues. But for this fiber thing, it is just remarkable. It's the largest fiscal mistake I think Vermont has made in its history. What they're doing is spending money to dig ditches. What I'm saying is let's make a deal with Elon Musk and through Starlink have faster broadband provided almost immediately like he did to Ukraine. Would you rather have free service or a free ditch? Right? I think most people would want free service. And on the free skiing issue, the fact is that out-of-staters have overwhelmed our ski resorts. These large organizations like Alterra and Vail underpricing local ski hills. And what I'm proposing is a hospitality tax on out-of-staters alone, which should fund about 338,000 free lift tickets for Vermonters only per season.
Well, you can read more about it on your website, Myers-Murmel. Thanks very much for being our guest.
Thank you, sir.
We'll be back in just a moment.